Hi, welcome back. I'm Dr. Wendla, and today we're talking about psychological abuse. So, what is psychological abuse? Psychological abuse includes confinement, isolation, verbal assault, humiliation, infantilization, condescension, or any other treatment that serves to diminish one's self-identity and dignity. The purpose of it is to establish control of one partner over another, which is the purpose of all types of abuse. Psychological abuse can be thought of as the same thing as emotional abuse or verbal abuse, generally not physical, not hands-on, not the kind of thing that leaves bruises on the outside. However, it is just as damaging, if not more so. Emotional abuse can be very subtle and insidious. So we'll talk about some of the ways to recognize it, and then we'll talk about some of the things you can do if you find yourself in that situation. Many people who find themselves in emotionally abusive relationships hide it, and they hide it really well, and they may not even be aware of it themselves, and certainly people outside, people at work, family members, friends may not be aware. It can happen to anyone, and it can happen to anyone, anytime, anywhere. Oftentimes, people experiencing psychological abuse blame themselves and are embarrassed to come forward, embarrassed to admit that it's going on, or they don't recognize what's happening. Very often, there is a cyclical nature to the abuse. So it starts off slowly. The abuser will do only the very small things, and we'll talk about those things in a minute, but do them on a very low level at first, and it will build up over time. There tends to be a cycle, as I said, where one partner emotionally abuses the other and then afterwards feels guilty, not for the emotional abuse, but generally for the consequences following the emotional abuse. The abuser then will make excuses or maybe apologize, although it's generally not sincere, and will resume more normal behavior for a period of time. So there'll be a period of quiescence for a while until the cycle starts up all over again. So let's start with some very basic signs of psychological abuse. There are very roughly sort of 5 categories that we can break this down into. And I think of them as the following. One is intimidation, and that means yelling and screaming and swearing and threatening, getting physical, that kind of thing, physically intimidating, that kind of thing. The second is mocking, so imitating, insulting, that sort of thing. The third is excluding, and that is isolating, ignoring, excluding from activities. The fourth is humiliation, and the fifth is denial of the abuse, and this can be the most insidious and oftentimes the most damaging of behaviors. So let's talk about these in more depth. Here are some of the ways that psychological abuse can occur. Anger disguised as a joke. So he says, I'm so excited I got my new wood chipper because now I can throw you in it and chop you into a million pieces after I kill you. So this is a sick personal joke, which the abuser may brush off as funny, but is clearly not funny, and is often told in front of other people. There may be other sick personal jokes which, without knowing the backstory, seem funny to friends or family, but are very hurtful to the person receiving the abuse. If you say something to the abuser in front of friends or family, they may be confused about why you feel hurt or even why you're crying. This may then reinforce the idea that you are oversensitive or misinterpreting or misperceiving or whatever. Here's how you deal with that. If you can't think of anything to say, you don't have to say anything. You can simply walk away. Even if there are other people in the room, you can just walk away. It's perfectly okay to do that. On the other hand, if you feel up to it, you can say, that's not funny. I don't like it. You can say, now that you've made yourself feel important, I'm going to go get a cup of coffee, take a bath, go for a walk, whatever it is that you want to do. All of these statements force authenticity into the situation. But again, if you don't feel up to it or you don't think it's going to be useful, walk away. The most important thing is just to recognize that a sick joke at your expense that hurts your feelings is not funny, is not a joke. It's actually abuse. Number two is accusing and blaming. So in this situation, an abuser will put a situation right back on you as if you are to blame, no matter what it is. So if you were to bring up something you are upset about, they will immediately tell you that somehow you are too sensitive, that you started the whole thing, that they wouldn't have to do whatever it was that they did if you had not made them so angry. Somehow or another, it gets turned around until it's your fault and you are blamed and you need to do something differently next time in order to prevent whatever's happened this time. It may even go so far as to become an accusation of doing something you didn't do, for example, cheating, so that everything gets diverted off course and suddenly you're on a topic you were never even on in the first place. Alternatively, if you were a better parent to the children, if you were a more loving spouse, if you were more attentive, if you were more something, then things would go better and they would be happier and these problems would not arise. Somehow or another, things always come back around to you having to be better or different or somehow be doing something better than you're doing. So you are always to blame in one way or another. Things get diverted in that direction. So our tendency in this situation is to defend ourselves and to try to prove that we are not to blame or that we don't deserve the accusation or that we do love them enough or that we are a good parent or we are whatever, is to somehow come back at the accusation. But of course, then we are going off course along with the abuser. We don't want to do that. Instead, we want to stay focused on the fact that they are trying to take us off course. We want to say, I refuse to take the blame for this. I am not to blame. I am not the cause of this. We want to stay focused on that issue and that issue only. Here's what you don't want to say. When your partner says you overreact, you're hypersensitive, we don't want to say, yeah, well, I wouldn't have to overreact if you didn't treat me so badly. We don't want to say, I wouldn't be so upset if you would just listen to me. We don't want to say those things because we're feeding into this myth that there's something wrong with us. So we want to stay focused on, I'm not going to take the blame. This is not my fault. And again, we can always stop the interaction and walk away. Number three is blocking and diverting. This one can be maddening. Basically, it means not answering, not interacting at all. So the abuser can just go on working while you're asking him or her a question. So you want to know, what would you like to have for dinner? And your partner can ignore you completely. And you continue to ask the question and you get no answer. It can be something as trivial as what would you like for dinner, or it can be something very significant like what happened to the car, which is, smashed up and sitting out front. And you're not getting an answer. You're getting no response at all. And you keep asking and they keep not answering at all. Or they go off onto another subject. This is a very common tool used by people who are psychological abusers. First thing to do is question yourself, how important is the information really? If it's not important, then walk away. You don't need to deal with this. If it is indeed very important information, you can say something like, answer me. I need to know what happened to the car. Or look at me. Tell me what happened to the car. Or stop trying to divert me or block me. What happened to the car? Now, it's quite possible you still will not get the information that you need, and you'll have to simply go about finding the information another way. That is acceptance. We cannot control another person, and that just might be how it's going to be. It's frustrating, but it's a fact. Again, most important thing is to recognize it's not your fault. This is just a tool that some people use. And remember, it's about control. Next is countering. Countering is interesting because it's not a disagreement. Disagreement is when two people have different opinions and they just disagree. And that's normal. That happens in every relationship. Countering is irrational. It means that whatever you say, your partner says something different. And it could be completely untrue. It could be a lie. It is your partner's response to their perception that you are a threat. And they probably don't even recognize this. So here's an example. You voice your opinion on anything. This cake is delicious. And your partner feels that as a threat to their person. So they respond by saying, you hate this cake. You hate this kind of cake. And you know that you have never said you hate this kind of cake. Say it's chocolate. So you say, I don't hate chocolate cake. And they say, you told me last week you hate chocolate cake. And your automatic response is to say, of course, no, I didn't tell you that. But now that you understand better the situation, you know what they're doing is countering. They're just making something up in order to oppose your opinion. And it's not going to go anywhere. There are two ways to deal with this countering behavior. One school of thought is that you can say, stop, cut it out, stop countering me. Another, and this is the one I prefer, is that you simply stop engaging with the person. I personally think that countering is such incredibly immature and irrational behavior. It's on a level with 3-year-old behavior, such that there's really nowhere to go with it. So, time to end the discussion. But there are lots of experts who think that it is best for you as the person dealing with the abusive behavior, it's best for you to say, stop, cut it out, stop countering. It's cleaner for you. So you could go either way. What you don't want to do is start trying to prove your point, prove your reality. That's the trap we fall into, and that doesn't get you anywhere. So next is denial. And denial is just a nice way of saying lying. And in this situation, it's not pathological lying, it's just straight up lying. The psychological abuser lies about anything and everything, and they lie in order to establish and maintain control. Control. Often to the point of irrationality, just like countering. And in fact, as a part of countering. The idea behind this chronic lying is to make you doubt your perceptions and your beliefs. And the more you doubt, the weaker you feel in your identity, and the less you'll believe not only in your own perceptions but in your own feelings, in your self identity, in your self esteem, and everything. Everything kind of becomes fragmented and falls apart, and the more control they have over you. And probably worst of all, they'll deny abusing you. So they don't recall. I don't recall saying that. I don't recall doing that. You could be right, but I don't think so. I don't think that happened. It's not how you remember it. you're taking it out of context. Let me explain that. And one of the most insidious things they'll do is ascribe certain motives to your behavior and change your motives and sort of rewrite history to ascribe motives to your behavior that you don't recall having. And it gets so twisted up and so turned around that it's very difficult for you to remember exactly what you thought that you remembered. So you wind up questioning basically everything. Lots of people get caught up in trying to prove to the abuser how they know that the abuser is lying. They keep a journal, they videotape, they ask for other people's input. Can you tell him that you heard it this way, or tell her you heard it this way? All these things, and it doesn't work. It may succeed only in making the abuser more angry and more steadfast in their lies. So it's much better simply to say, I don't believe you, or I don't believe you and I want it to stop happening, and leave it at that. It may or may not change the abuser's behavior, but it will leave your side of the street clean. You will be clean and you won't get caught up in this fruitless attempt to prove that you know that they are lying. You already know they're lying and they know they're lying. Everybody knows that they're lying. There's nothing to prove. So with deprivation and withholding, the abuser will literally deprive the person they are abusing of all kinds of things, from physical closeness to communication to social interaction. It's the silent treatment. They may actually go completely silent and not interact at all. They may withhold information that you need, maybe financial information. Maybe you don't know where the checkbook is and you can't buy food without it. And so they specifically withhold. They don't say they'll withhold, but they just don't say where the checkbook is. They may withhold information from you that harms your children, or harms other loved ones, other family members, or pets. They may withhold time that you need from them. They may create a situation where your time is not valued and great, huge quantities of your time are wasted because of the withholding behavior on their part. Unfortunately, with the withholding behavior, there's not a lot you can do as far as the abuser goes, but you can seek out help from other people, particularly social contact and support. You can seek from other people, and legal recourse if it's money and that sort of thing. Discounting means making fun of you, diminishing you, usually through nasty comments about your thoughts or your behaviors or your interests or anything like that. The best way to handle discounting behavior is to stay away from the abuser if they are engaging in that kind of speech or attitude. Judging and criticizing is exactly what it sounds like, and typically that happens in public and private, and there's no hiding it. So the abuser will simply say nasty things. You're fat, you're ugly, you're stupid, and there'll be no attempt whatsoever to cover it up. It's humiliating and embarrassing, and oftentimes by the time it's gotten to this point, the person being abused has come to believe some of these statements and accepts the criticism from the abuser. Sometimes it's a little less obvious. He's so incompetent, he breaks everything he tries to fix around the house. Or she's so dependent, she has daddy issues. But regardless, it's very critical and hurtful. Name calling is exactly what it sounds like, and it is unacceptable under any circumstances, regardless of whatever you've done. It's never, ever okay to call anybody any sort of name. Generally, calling someone a name is an attempt to obliterate their identity, to wipe them out and make them nothing. So it makes the person feel like nothing, and it makes the abuser feel like they have made them into nothing. It is really important in a situation like this to say to the abuser very forcefully as you can, do not ever call me that name again. It does not necessarily mean that the abuser will change their behavior, but this, as with all these other suggestions, is meant to help you feel better and feel stronger and feel cleaner on your side of the street. So that's why you make the statement, is to reclaim your own identity and your own self-esteem, not necessarily to affect the other person's behavior, because that's sort of out of our hands. Ordering and demanding. That happens when an abuser tells you what to do as if you are a child. And that is also unacceptable. I don't follow orders. The recommended response is that I do not follow orders. Personally, I think ignoring the person is the way to handle it. But there are, again, two schools of thought. One is to make the statement, I don't follow orders. Claiming that truth can be very helpful and very cleansing. If you have to see which one works for you. I think that simply walking away, ignoring the person, is also helpful. What you don't want to do is engage with them and explain why they can't say that to you, why you don't follow orders, why it's not fair. None of that is helpful. Threatening behavior, this can take a lot of different forms, anything from physically threatening, intimidating, kind of getting in your face, to blocking a door, to threatening to harm, verbally threatening to harm you. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill your pets. I'm going to take the children and leave, to threatening other family members, to more silent threats, sitting in the corner, polishing a knife, looking at you, punching walls, throwing things. So the first thing to do in a situation like this is to analyze the threat. If there's imminent danger, of course, you have to get out and call for help. And you always want to err on the side of conservative. If you're wondering if there's a threat, a physical threat to your safety, assume there is and go from there. If the person you're dealing with has been physically violent toward you in the past, the likelihood is very high they will be physically violent again. The best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So safety is always first. But threatening behavior of any type is also not acceptable. And you have the right to tell your partner exactly that threatening behavior is not acceptable once you've established that you are not physically in danger. Trivializing. So an abuser will generally not be able to share glory and happiness in your accomplishments. They will want to diminish those accomplishments and trivialize them in order to maintain control and power over you. So trivializing is an example of verbal abuse that takes away from your accomplishments and ideas. If you feel this is happening, do not engage in an argument about how your feelings are hurt and how unfair that was and how you didn't like their comment, and don't get into a big process with it, because they wanted to hurt you. So explaining to them that they hurt you will get you nowhere. It was meant to hurt. What you need to do is say something like, that's enough of that. Now I'm going to go have a cup of coffee, or take a bath, or call my mother, or something else. Do not fall into the trap of processing your feelings, your hurt feelings about what just happened. There are, of course, many other things that abusers do and say, and you'll see some of them on the screen around me as we're talking. You can pause the screen and take a screenshot if you'd like to keep track of these. In addition, there are lots of things they say that I think are very common, and so I've collected a few of those, and they're going to be floating around me as I'm talking in this last minute or so. Um, I'm going to have the phone numbers and text contacts for some of the national domestic violence hotlines. And make no mistake, emotional abuse, psychological abuse is violent. I'll have those in the links below and also on the bottom of the screen shortly. The most important thing to take away from this video is that abuse, emotional abuse, psychological, verbal abuse, physical abuse is never, ever the fault of the person being abused. And that's a fact. The first step, and often the most difficult, is to recognize that it is happening. It is not necessary to immediately terminate a relationship. Sometimes knowing that takes a lot of pressure off of people. It is perfectly reasonable to reach out for help and more information without the pressure of having to leave a relationship. There is no shame in that. Please check out the phone numbers and contacts I have listed below and all the information I have floating around me. There are two conditions that make for dangerous relationships. One is substance abuse, and another is malignant narcissism. Not narcissistic personality disorder per se, but malignant narcissism. If you're interested in those videos, they're here and here. There are links and also in the description below. Thank you for listening. I'm Dr. Wenla. This is Psych Talk. I'll see you next time.